Okay, today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Tzadi. Today's daf the beginning is quite complicated. The end is quite simple. So most of the Shiur is going to be on the first part. The reason why it's very complicated, one of the reasons, is because it's one of those cases where the Gemara talks about things as if we know what they're talking about, and only after do they explain to us. So I'm going to teach things a little bit in a different order so that we can preface it with what is important in the beginning that we know before we get started. So we'll just start again with Tanu Rabbanan that we started with yesterday, a few lines from the bottom, about 8 lines. Somebody invites people to be part of his Pesach or his Chagiga. Whatever money he collects, right? We talked about you collect, let's say through Paybox, something like that, or Zeli, and you have people send you money. What's the status of that money? Okay, now normally this is what happens. I buy a korban, I take money, I sanctify it, I say this is hekdesh, I'm going to buy a korban with it. Once I designate it, then I buy the korban with it, and then what happens? The money leaves, the sanctity leaves the money and moves onto the animal. But that only works if I take an animal that's not sanctified. In this case, there's something weird that happens, which is that I buy an animal, I take money, the money's sanctified, then I buy the animal. Now, an animal's sanctified, now I sell it to you. What's the problem? When I sell it to you, you give me money that you sanctified, and now you buy the animal, and at this point, I'm going to be stuck because the money that you give me is going to be sanctified. It won't lose its sanctity because it only loses sanctity if it moves on to something that's chulin, that's not sanctified. So the question is going to be, how does this work? Okay, so let's just keep reading and then we'll get to the question in a minute. So here it says it works. It says whatever money I collect for that animal will be chulin, is not going to be sanctified. So we don't really know how that's going to work. That's going to be the big question the Gemara is going to struggle with. In addition, I can't sell, if I designate an animal for me for a korban, I can't sell it to anybody else. And if I do, it's useless. And what happens with the money? Right? You might think, well, I should just return the money to you. No, we penalize you because you shouldn't have bought a korban that you can't buy. So therefore, they go, as we said, into the Ketz HaMizbeach, all the sacrifices that they just put randomly on the Mizbeach when they need. So first question, which they answer pretty easily. If it's a useless sale, so why? They say, Rava says, Knasa, right? We penalize you. We want to penalize you for what you did. And then even, why does it say kol shehein? No matter what you paid, because it's to tell you, if you paid 5 instead of 4. Now, what's the issue of 5 and 4? I didn't have time to explain this yesterday, but what does it mean? It means if you overpaid. Now, when you overpay, what's the difference? Well, the point is, if you overpay, you might have thought that sometimes when people overpay, it's because maybe you just wanted to give me a gift. Maybe you weren't really trying to buy my korban. They say, even if it looks like maybe you were just giving me a gift and you weren't really trying to buy my korban, then right, think about it. Maybe you wanted to give me a gift and you didn't think I would accept it. So you said, oh, I'm going to buy your korban. I'm thinking maybe I'll accept it then. So if you added extra and it looks like a gift, it doesn't matter. We still penalize you. It still looks like you bought a korban, and that's a problem. Okay. Now comes the big question that's going to get us into a bit of a complicated sugya. Amar Ula, v'itema Rabbi Yoshai. Either Ula or Rabbi Yoshai says the following. Efshar yadin chavri bavlai taima dahan milta. Okay, it's clear this is a complicated thing because he says, could it be, these are Israeli Amoraim, and they say, maybe our friends in Babylonia know the answer to this question that can explain this to us because we don't really understand this. Maybe someone can enlighten us. Okay, it seems like they probably asked all the rabbis around and no one had a good answer to this. If, right, one set aside the lamb and one set aside money, both become sanctified at that point. So again, in order for the money to turn to chulin, it has to have somewhere to fall on, to kind of be placed into. The hekdesh has to go somewhere. Hekdesh can't go into hekdesh. So basically, we're stuck. We don't understand how this could be. Now, the answer starts out very complicated because Abaye starts off with, if it weren't for the fact that Rabbi Yoshai explains it this way, I would have explained it another way. And he's actually not talking about our case. He's talking about a Mishnah in Tmura. So for this, I'm going to pull up the screen. I'm going to pull up the picture, the chart from today. Okay, now, if you look here, we're going to look at this Mishnah in Tmura. So you have to understand this before. Unfortunately, the Gemara is only going to get to this later, about halfway, almost halfway down the page. It says, what is this Rabbi Yashaya? Where did he say it? On what did he say it? So I'm going to bring it now. I'm going to bring it shortened version because some of it isn't relevant. If somebody gave Natan la mukdashim be'enena, the first thing you have to know is there's a pasuk in the Torah that says you can't bring, if a man gave a gift to a prostitute and it was an animal, let's say, you can't bring that animal to the temple and use it as a sacrifice because that's disgusting, right? It was used for something inappropriate, therefore it can't be used. So what if natana etnena behekdesh? Okay, natana mukdashim be'enena. Let's say the gift he gives her was something that was sanctified. The man sanctified an animal for a sacrifice and then brought it and paid it to a prostitute. Now, what's different about that? Well, it's not owned by him, right? Once he takes the animal, he sanctifies it, it's no longer his, although we're going to see maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But let's assume once it's a sanctified animal and he said, I'm bringing this as a korban, then he gives it to her as a gift. Can you bring it to the temple? So the Mishnah says, Hare elu mutarim. It's actually allowed. We'll see why in a minute. Ofot techulin, if you bring birds that are not sanctified, Hare elu asurim. Now, I think what they're saying is you might have thought maybe it's only animals, but it's also birds that will be forbidden. So they say there's a kavachomer that proves the ofot are forbidden. And now once we prove the ofot are forbidden, we're now going to do a kavachomer in the reverse and say the following. Kavachomer lemukdashim me'ata. You should make a kavachomer from the ofot to the animals. Ma ofot she'ein amun posel behem. What's lighter about an oaf, about a bird? There's no blemishes by birds, only like if there's really some severe problem. Otherwise, we don't really have blemishes by birds. So their law is much lighter. And yet, etnan u'machir chal alehem. But yet we're going to have the deen of etnan zona and machir kelev. That's if you sell a kelev and you get that. The kelev was, a dog was a bad thing. Anyway, we're not going to get into the details of that right now. Mukdashim, something that's, so if the ofot, which doesn't have a blemish, is going to be within the laws of etnan, so mukdashim, animals, shamun posel bahem, eino din she'enanu machir chal alehem, wouldn't you say, obviously then something sanctified, which is an animal, which is more severe than a bird, wouldn't you think that the law would apply to them? Comes the Mishnah and says, Talmud lomar lechol neder. It says in the verse there with the etnan, it says, don't bring a Beit Hashem Elokecha lechol neder, for any promise that you bring. That comes to prat linador, comes to exclude something that was already promised to the temple, which is hekdesh. If it was already sanctified, it's not going to be included. So now comes the big important line here. To this they assume. Now take this Mishnah. What's at the root of this Mishnah? Tama de katav rachmana neder. If the Torah had it, now the whole reason we get to this law is because it said lechol neder. Without that word, okay, now this is important because it's not true. But it's not true because we have the drasha neder. But if we didn't have the drasha neder, what would logic state? Halav hachi hava mina mukdashim chal isor etnan alehem. So this is all going to be from a derivation of this Mishnah, which is only because there's a drasha is this the case. But if there weren't a drasha, what would you have said? Mukdashim would have isor etnan on them. Now, how could this possibly be? Because when a man has a sacrifice, an animal that he already designated to sacrifice, and gives it as a gift to a prostitute, if it's already sanctified, what does it mean if it's sanctified? It's not his. He can't even give it. It's useless. If I give you something that's not mine, that's not considered that I gave you anything. So ha'en adam oser davar she'eno shelo. And not only that, but you can't turn something that's not yours into a forbidden item. So you can't say, so the premise of this Mishnah is questionable. How could it possibly be that if someone gives a gift of hekdesh, shouldn't count at all? So it shouldn't be called an etnan, and it shouldn't be forbidden. Now, it isn't forbidden, right? Remember, but it's not forbidden because of this word, lechol neder. But were it not for that word, it would have been forbidden. So the whole question is, why would it have been forbidden? It's really not his. So now Rabbi Yoshaya comes along. Again, I'm going to do this all outside first because otherwise you won't understand the Gemara as we read it. Rabbi Yoshaya says this is a unique case. What's the case? Okay, you could try to imagine this scenario. A man goes to a prostitute and it's close to Pesach. And he says, listen, instead of paying you, why don't you join my korban Pesach, right? Which is kind of funny because she's now going to come and eat Pesach with him and his whole family. And he says, okay, so join my Pesach. Now, it's mimaneh zona al pischo. So he uses, right? He says, come join my Pesach. And it must be Rebbe, he says. Now, what's Rebbe? Again, you have to have this whole machlok at Rebbe and Tanakama, which the Gemara is only going to tell us later. But again, I'll tell you now. This will make it simpler when we get to the part later. The pasuk we saw yesterday, okay, Tanya. I'm now in the middle section of this chart that I put on the page. Rabbi Yoshaya brings this Braita. He brings Rebbe, and let's read the Braita. Tanya. We saw this pasuk yesterday, right? If you don't have a seh, what do? You go to your neighbor and you go together. Now, the whole question here, and this goes back to our case, which is when someone purchases the animal, part of the animal from you, according to Tanakama, hachayehu miseh, that means let the owner who gets now the money, okay, who you're paying through, whatever mechanism you're paying him, he can hachayehu miseh, meaning michdei achila v'lo michdei mekach, meaning what can I do with that money? I can only use the money for purposes of the Korban Pesach. I can't use it to go buy myself new clothes. I can't use it for anything I want. This money is designated for the sacrifice. That makes it sound like you gave me hekdesh money and the money's still hekdesh, and that's why it can only go. That's different from the Braita we saw. But Rebbe says, and here comes the important part, af mikdei mekach. He says you can buy whatever you want with that money. In other words, he can, if he doesn't have money, he's allowed to use this to make money. And if I need money, I bought this animal, I can go make money off of this. I can go invite people to be part of my Pesach, part of my Chagiga. The ma'od I get are chulin. Shal minat kein ikdishu Yisrael pischeihem. This is an important line. It says, this is, how did I buy this animal? I bought this animal in a particular way because I wanted to be able to sell it to other people, which means, now we're going to have two approaches here. This is Rabbi Yoshaya's approach. He says, when it comes to Korban Pesach, and this is going to answer our question, when it comes to Korban Pesach, when I bought that animal, normally I buy an animal and it's fully Kodesh. According to Rebbe, I buy this animal and it's not fully Kodesh because I knew that I was going to want to sell it to someone. So I only sanctified my part in it. The rest of it stays chulin. And that's why the case with the Etnan, and we're going to say the same thing in the Braita, is where he invites her to join his Pesach. And it wasn't sanctified yet. He invites her to come on, eat the leg of it, let's say. The leg wasn't sanctified. And that's why it works. He could give her that. It's actually hers, which now becomes a gift to a prostitute, which now becomes problematic. And that's why it would theoretically be problematic were it not for the drasha of neder. Okay, so we haven't read any of this yet inside, but I tried to explain it outside so you would understand. What gets complicated about Abaye is, Abaye says, were it not for Rabbi Yoshaya, I would have a different explanation. Okay, I'll already tell you. Also, this will just make it easier to understand. There's two basic ways to understand this. One is to say that when I bought the animal, okay, we'll use me as the example of the animal and you as the example of all the people who are buying the animal, parts of the animal from me. So Rabbi Yoshaya basically says, when I buy the animal, I make sure not to sanctify all of it. I say, basically, my money's going to, the part of the animal that I'm going to eat, and the rest of it I plan to sell. So that's going to stay chulin so that I can sell it and not end up with hekdesh money, because what do I want hekdesh money for? According to, and it's fascinating what Rebbe is basically saying, that if I don't have money, I can go make money off this Korban Pesach, right? You would think maybe that's not exactly the most appropriate thing, and that's why Tanakama doesn't agree, but Rebbe thinks it's no problem. It's a free market. According to Abaye, he's going to say, no, it's not me. It's the people who are purchasing. They know that I won't buy from them if their money's sanctified, because I'll be stuck with sanctified money. So if they want to be able to purchase, they, in the beginning, never make their money sanctified. So they basically don't sanctify the money so that it'll always be chulin. When they give it to me, it just stays chulin. It doesn't need to be transferred onto something. So those are the two different approaches. But now let's start reading it inside. Amar Abaye. Ilav, he already starts off, were it not for, so it already know it's going to be complicated, right? Ilav de ukma Rabbi Yoshaya lahi b'manezo nal pischo v'rebihi. If he had not explained the Mishnah, now first, Abaye is going to focus just on that Mishnah. If he hadn't explained that the Mishnah was mimanezo nal pischo and rebihi, and that's how they understood how the Etnan Zona case worked, I would have said, hava mukminal, I would have explained it in a much simpler manner, which is, now this will have nothing to do with our Braita, by the way. He's going to say that Mishnah in Tamura, I would have explained it, that it follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which most people disagree with. Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds any kodshim kalim, like a shlamim or a pesach or any that the owners eat, when I buy the animal, it doesn't become sanctified. Why? because I'm going to eat it in the end. So it doesn't have sanctity till I bring it to the temple and sacrifice it, right? And then part of it becomes sanctified. But he says, I would have said that that were the case, that it's my own possession. If it's my own possession, then of course, if I give it to a prostitute, it's going to be considered a problem of etna. And again, were it not for the fact that it's a pratlan adul. But other than that, it would have been considered. So I would have said that. Okay, now, if I say that, aval b'Pesach, now why would I have said this? Because I wouldn't have thought to agree with him about what he says about Pesach. Then I would have said, b'Pesach lo m'shayer inish. When I buy my sacrifice, I don't leave over part. I actually sanctify the entire animal. B'ma'ot v'adai m'shayer inish. And this is what I told you, that it's the people who purchase it. They make sure their money never becomes sanctified. And that will explain the Braita. Because when they set aside their money in the beginning, they knew that I already bought my animal and I'll never sell it to them if the money is going to be sanctified. So from the beginning, they never sanctified their money. That's what I would have said. Now, veha, and then what would I have explained? That the Mishnah is Rebbe. I'm sorry, the Braita is Rebbe. Okay? And now, what did Rebbe say? Remember, Rebbe said, I can make money off of this. And that's why the ma'ot stay chulin. If I can't make money off of the animal, then it doesn't matter if it's hekdesh, because I'm going to anyway only be able to use it for sanctified things having to do with the sacrifice. So he's explaining, no. I think, right, that Rebbe would hold, I hold that the Braita goes like Rebbe. And again, it's not that I didn't sanctify the animal fully, it's that the people didn't sanctify their money. Ubemaut vadai mishayer inish. Okay, I'm skipping all the parentheses because parentheses usually means take them out. Now, hahita kamokim la. Now let's go back to Rabbi Yoshaya. The Mishnah that Rabbi Yoshaya, kamokim la Rabbi Yoshaya ki Rebbe, the Mishnah in Tmura that we quoted before, that he holds like Rebbe. Lo mukim na le'ana ki Rebbe. Why didn't I say that's Rebbe? Because I hold Dibber Pesach lo m'shayer inish. Because again, what was the focus there? The focus there was the owner. Can the owner include her in his Pesach as a gift? Will that be considered? Can he actually do that? Yes, because it's not his according to Rabbi Yoshaya, right? But Abai says, I didn't explain it that way because I think that I did sanctify the entire animal, in which case that's why I didn't explain it like Rabbi Yoshaya. Because according to my interpretation, it's only the money people buy it for that isn't sanctified, but my animal is fully sanctified. If my animal is fully sanctified, well, then I can't sell it. I can't give it to his owner as a gift and it will be considered a gift to her. No, it won't be considered a gift to her at all because I actually don't own it. In which case it wouldn't have been a problem, in which case we didn't need the drasha. So, or the drasha doesn't make sense. So basically, he says, that's why I didn't hold, because I have a different approach. In other words, again, this is all based on two different approaches about hekdesh, and that's why I explained that Mishnah to be according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Braita, which means, remember, it's all kochim kalim, and that's why there's no sanctity, because according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, kochim kalim is belonging to the owner. Now, v'ha leika le'ukma ki Rabbi Yossi. Now, why didn't he just say very simply that if you hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili and you say that any kochim kalim, which includes the Pesach, is not sanctified, so that would have been a super easy explanation to bring by us, right? That would explain, again, what's our question? How did the money turn to chulin? If the money moves on to something that's chol, then it can turn, then the sanctity can go on it. If it goes on to something sanctified, then you can't move sanctity from kodesh to kodesh. So if we said very simply in our Braita that we started with, right, this case where the people gave me money for my Korban Pesach, the money becomes chulin, why don't we just say it's because when I bought the Korban Pesach, I held, right, the Braita holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and it's still mine, and therefore it's chulin. Therefore, when you buy it, the money, right, the hekdesh moves from your money onto the item. That would have been a good explanation, but you can't say that, okay? Because remember, he explained our thing differently. So, why? What else does it say in that Braita? Something that clearly doesn't hold by Rabbi Yossi, which is if I sell a burnt offering of mine, or I send a peace offering. Now remember, what's a peace offering? Kodshim kalim. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's mine, which means if I sell it to you, it's a valid sale. And here it says it's not a valid sale. Why is it not a valid sale? Because I'm selling you something that doesn't belong to me. So it's clear that the Braita doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Okay, so now let's just review for 1 minute. Okay, we'll pull up the chart and we'll review where we're up to. So what we had is we had this Mishnah in Tmura, right? About the zona. We said, how could it be that theoretically, were it not for the neder, this wouldn't have worked, right? This would have worked. It would have been an Ednan zona problem. How could that be? Hare ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo. Rabbi Yoshaya said he actually sold something that was, he gave her a part of the Pesach, and it's according to Rebbe that the owner leaves over part that's chulin, which means it did belong to him, what he gave her, and that's why theoretically it would have been an etnan. And Abaye says, oh no, that's just Rabbi Yossi Hagalili. Okay, now according to Abaye, okay, let's look up here. Abaye says here that the Mishnah, right, if it were not, that he explained it like Rebbe, I would have said it's Rabbi Yossi Hagalili. And the Braita, that's actually not written here, but the Braita, right, I explain like Rebbe. The Braita is, and how do I explain it? Differently than Rabbi Yoshai understood Rebbe. I explained Rebbe that I can sell parts because I'm allowed to sell parts and we want to allow me to make money on the deal. Then, by the way, I assume they did this because they wanted it to be a free market so that what? So that people will actually sell their korban pesachs, right? We'll be able to have a process here where people will be part of pesachs. So if I want, I could sell it, which means if I'm going to sell it, people aren't going to be able to buy it, right? I won't want to take money from people if it's going to end up hekdesh. So the people themselves, right? This is Pesach lo Mashayir Inish, but b'mo v'adai Mashayir Inish. Mashayir Inish means they leave it as hekdesh, as chulin, and not hekdesh. Okay, so he's going to say basically, number one, the Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which means we're going to put that aside. It is irrelevant to our purposes, our discussion. But I'm going to take Rebbe that Rabbi Yashai discussed, and I'm going to understand him differently, right? Basically, he's going to say that people don't sanctify their money in order to create a situation where people will sell their parts of the korban pesach. Okay, so again, the difference between Rabbi Yoshaya and Abaye is that Rabbi Yoshaya thinks that it's me who bought the korban pesach from the beginning, left over part as chulin so that I could sell it, and the other, Abaye, is focusing on the buyer. The buyers don't turn their money into hekdesh so that I will actually give them the korban pesach. Otherwise, no one's going to want to buy from these buyers because no one's going to want to sell to them because they'll have nothing to do with the money. Okay, and that's all, by the way, according to Rebbe only. Tanakama, who has a different approach to this, it won't even match them at all. Okay, so let's just keep reading now. So now we said, now you have to go back to the very beginning, the first line of the daf. Amar Abai, ilav de ukma Rabbi Yoshaya bahi b'memanezonal pischo v'rebihi. If Rabbi Yoshaya hadn't explained it that way, I would have explained that Mishnah differently. But now it continues that sentence. Okay, it took a while, but now we're back to that sentence. The hashta, we're in the first wide line. The hashta de ukma Rabbi Yoshaya lahu b'memanezonal pischo v'rebihi. But now that I heard his explanation, shmamina de sfira le'afilu b'pischo m'shayir inish. What he's basically saying is, I assumed, and all along he kept saying that, but Pesach lo m'shayir inish, right? When I bought that Pesach, I for sure made the whole animal sanctified. Now that I heard Rabbi Yoshaya, I understand that maybe there's an option that also it could be done that way. That is, he basically leaves open two possibilities. Either, and that gives two answers to our original question. Either the owner leaves some over, doesn't make the whole animal sanctified, or the buyers don't make their money sanctified. So he said, if I hadn't heard him, I would have assumed that it's not the owner, it's the buyers. Once I heard him, I see that it could also be both. Okay, now that was the complicated part. Now we're going to go back, and this is just review, because now finally the Gemara is going to tell us, right? It's a good example, like I said, where the Gemara doesn't really put things out there the way you would have expected. Maybe they all knew this Mishnah and they knew exactly what they were talking about. So, Mahi to Rabbi Yoshaya, where is this Rabbi Yoshaya? Ditznan, and now we're going to read that whole Mishnah. I skipped a small part of it before because it wasn't relevant, but now we'll read the whole thing. Natana mukdashim be'ednena. If you give a prostitute an animal as a gift, hare elu mutarin. Okay, they can be used as a sacrifice. Ofot dechulin hare elu asurim. But birds that are chulin, right, that aren't sanctified, those are forbidden. Shaya bedin, because it's only logical, or you would have thought. Again, this is all what you would have thought by logic, and then the verse comes to tell you that's not the case. My mukdashim, this is the part we didn't read. Animals who are sanctified. Shahamum posel bahem. The blemishes mess them up, so they're very severe, and yet are stringent. Ein etnan u'machir chala lehem, but these laws of etnan and machir kelev don't apply. Ofot she'ein hamum posel bahem, ein odin she'ein etnan u'machir chala lehem. But birds which don't have blemishes messing them up, so their laws are much more lenient. Wouldn't you think that a gift of a prostitute and something you bought a dog for wouldn't apply to these birds? Talmud Lomar lechol neder. Therefore, it says lechol neder. That verse says for any neder, any comes to include more things than you would have thought. L'rabot talfot, that comes to say it's not just animals, it's also birds. Now, once you have the birds included, kavachomer l'mukdashim me'ata. Now let's reverse the kavachomer and learn the mukdashim from the birds. Ma'ofot she'enamum posel bahem, and yet etnanu machir chala lehem. They're not blemished, isn't relevant, and yet etnanu machir is relevant to them. Mukdashim she'amum posel bahem, ein odin she'enanu machir chala lehem. But ones that are sanctified, that blemishes would mess them up, wouldn't you think that enan zona would apply to them? This is what we saw. The chol neder comes to say, oh no, not this, not something that already was promised to the temple. Which again, they say now, what do you derive? And this leads us to Rabbi Yoshaya. The whole reason is because the Torah said neder. Halav hachi, if you didn't have that verse, what would you have said? Hava amin, I would have said, mukdashim chal yisrael enan alehem. You would have thought it does apply to them based on the kavachomer from the birds. But how can one turn something into forbidden item if it's not even his own? Right? I can't go to your house, take something of yours and make it forbidden. It's not mine to do. So likewise here, it's hekdesh. So again, here comes in Rabbi Yoshaya and he explains, this is Rebbe's opinion, and it's a case of mimaneh zonal pischo, where he hadn't actually sanctified the animal because the owner leaves over part that he doesn't sanctify to be able to sell it. In this case, instead of selling it, he gave it as payment to his prostitute. Now, my Rebbe, again, we know this already because I told you, but assume we didn't know this. So the Gemara says, where's Rebbe's opinion? And now we get to that big machloket. Can you make money off the Korban Pesach or not? Very interesting machloket. Imim atabayim miyot miseh. Achayehu miseh. That's what we saw Tanakama. You can only use the money, right? You can live off of it for the animal. Miseh, only for the animal, meaning anything the animal needs, you can spend that money on. Wood, right? Anything else you might need, utensils to serve the Korban Pesach, but not anything else. And Rabbi Yomi, if you don't have enough money, you can invite people to join you. They can pay you. Right? That's the whole reason why the Jews, that's the way they sanctified their Pesachs, were only partial sanctification so that they could sell the other parts. Now there's going to be a debate about this debate. Okay, Rabba and Rabbi Zera, it's just funny to talk about them now because there's a famous story about Purim, where right before Purim, I just can't help but not mention it, which is where I think it's Rabba accidentally or purposely, or we don't know what, actually Rabbi Zera invites him to his Purim student, and Rabba slaughters him and kills him. And right, Shafta Rabba, I think it's Rabba kills him, I forget. And then he prays for him to come back to life. And then he invites him the next year and he says, no, thanks, but no thanks, right? I'm not going to rely on miracles. Anyway, that's the zug that we're talking about here, Rabbi and Rabbi Zera, this famous story. We'll learn it when we get to Megillah. But some people say that that's why you shouldn't get drunk. And they got drunk and, they took the drunk too far. And some people say that's why you can get drunk on Purim, but not too drunk. Or some people use it as a proof. This is how you know that you can get drunk on Purim, because look what happened here, right? And they did get drunk, even though the results were pretty bad. Anyway, it's just an aside. Let's get back to our topic. So Rabbi and Rabbi Zera. What he says is, one of them, we don't know who, when it's talking about wood, firewood, everyone agrees that you can sell and use it for firewood, because that's like the Pesach itself. Now we're going to understand this differently than we did before. The machloket is, can I use it to buy matzah and maror? Are matzah and maror considered part of the Pesach or not considered part of the Pesach? This is a different approach to Rabbi. Not that he thinks it's a free market, you can use it for anything. No, the question is, how far do we go? Rabbanan savrei ha'achilach ritahu. It's a different food. There's Pesach and there's matzah and maror. The Rebbe saval, and this is also very interesting into a whole other topic. Rebbe holds kevan dehechshero de Pesachu kigufa de Pesach dami. You have to eat the Pesach and the matzah and maror with you have to eat the Pesach with matzah maror. So that means this is all part and parcel of the Pesach. It includes, but this is interesting. Do you view the matzah maror? Okay, let's just read one more minute and then I'll say it. Dichtiv al matzot u'murorim yochluhu. You have to eat the Pesach with matzah maror. So does that mean this is something separate that you happen to just eat with it? Or in order to fill the Pesach, it needs matzah maror. If you don't have that, you don't really fulfill your Pesach, which means, right, which leads to, I know Phyllis has been asking me about this. How did they do Vigadat Talabincha at the time of Korban Pesach, right? And there's this question about, what was Al Matzot U'Murorim is that's telling the story. That's the part of the story. It's by doing actions, we tell a story. And that's the part of the story. Now, and it's also a springboard to tell the story. It's not like they didn't do Vigadat Talabincha in those days. They clearly did. And they did it with the Matzah Maror. That's how they continually told their story, through props. Okay, so that's part of the Pesach, according to Rebbe. So Rebbe's saying you can use it to buy matzah and maror because that's part of it. Whereas the rabbis say you can only use it for, let's say, burning, roasting the Korban Pesach, but not for anything else. The kevan de machshirin de Pesach ninu ke Pesach tami. It's as if it's the Korban itself because it's a machshir. Ki pligi likach bo chaluk likach bo talit. Oh, sorry. I actually read the wrong line, right? Sorry. Sorry. I'm reading now. I just got confused where I was up to. Okay. So let's just go back for a quick minute. So not in the 18, kipligi b'matzah maror. I was reading the wrong line. So Rabbanan savar ha'achila achritehu. The rabbi said this is a different eating. And Rebbe savar kevan dechshiro b'pesach hu kigufa de pesach dami. Right? And Rebbe says this is like the Pesach itself. But the other approach was the chanamar b'matzah u'maror nami kulei amalo pligi. Dichtiv al matzot u'murim yochluhu. I read that part too early, but it's the same idea. Everyone agrees about that because you eat it al matzot u'murim. Of course, it's part of the Pesach. There's no debate about that. That's in agreement. The machloket is likach bo chaluk, likach bo talit. Can I go buy clothes with it? Right? Can I buy something totally disconnected? And that's where we go back to Rebbe saying there's a free market. You can use it for whatever you want. So there's a debate. Rabbanan savre miyot misama rachmana hachayeu lisse, only for the seh itself, which would include matzah and maror. The Rebbe savar hachayei atzmecha miseh. Right? You can support yourself from the seh. Not for the seh, from the seh. You can make money off of the seh. It's just a really, really interesting concept to say you can use this mitzvah, right, and go make money, go make profit off of it, right? Like all those people who sell lulav and etrog and make huge profits off of them, right? Okay. Okay, now we're back to one last question on Abaye before we finish with this whole Abaye Rabbi Yoshaya part. And as what we did right now in this last part was we said, where did Rabbi Yoshaya say this? On what Mishnah? We brought the Mishnah, we explained. Then we said, who was Rebbe that Rabbi Yoshaya was talking about? We brought the machloket, and then we brought a machloket about the machloket. What exactly their machloket is, how far did they go? And now we're back to Abaye, one small question. When Abaye said, if he had not done that, this is just a repeat, right? I would have said this was all Rabbi Yossi Glili. But, and here's the important line that we're going to question. Aval b'Pesach, he thinks lo m'shayir inish, even according to Rebbe, right? When I buy it fully, I turn it into hakdesh. It's the people that don't turn their money into hakdesh. But haktane behegel, look at what Rebbe said. He's trying to understand Rebbe as the people who buy, the buyers, leave their money as chulin. But it says, the end of Rebbe was, the people who sanctified their Pesachs knew that the only way they would sell it is if they left Par Chulin, so they left Par Chulin. That sounds very clear. It's the owners of the Pesach and not the buyers. So Ema, Rabbi Abaye would have to change the words. For this reason, they sanctified their money. In other words, it's the Israel, the buyers. He would just have to change the wording a little to make it match what he was saying. Okay, that's that. Now we're up to the more simple part of today's stuff. Let's see how quickly we can get through it. Zav shera'a shtei re'iyot. Okay, we're back to people on Erev Pesach that are not fully pure. Are we allowed to sacrifice the Korban Pesach? It's a little easy because we've already seen this a few times. So a Zav, remember there's a Zav who sees one day, two re'iyot, twice he sees, three times he sees. Not on sex, it could be day, whatever. We're not going to get into the whole issue of days or not. It's not like a Zav who it's by day, it's re'iyot, how many times he sees. Once he sees 2, what do we say? He has to wait 7 days. 7th day of the morning, he goes to the mikvah. Nighttime, he's already pure. The Zav who sees 3 times has to bring a korban on day number 8, and he can't eat sanctified items till he brings his sacrifice. So Zav sharash de're'iyot shochatin alav bashvi'i. You can slaughter the korban pesach on the 7th day. We're going to have to see, did he already go to the mikvah or not go to the mikvah? We don't know. Ra'ash shalosh shochatin alav bashmini shalo. Presumably, before he even brings his sacrifices, we can sacrifice even on the 8th day, even though he hasn't brought his sacrifices yet. Shomeret yom keneged yom. Now we're on a Zava. Zava 1 day. She goes to the mikvah day number 2, right, and waits to make sure she doesn't see blood that day. So that's Shomeret yom keneged yom. So shochatin ala basheni shala. Already on the morning of number 2, it's just like the Zava in his 7th day, right? She already can go to the mikvah and wait till it gets dark, and then she's fine. So you can slaughter the korban pesach. Ratashne yamim. It's the same thing because the 3rd day for her is like the 2nd day for the 1 day person. So if she suffered 2 days, you can slaughter for her on the 3rd day. If she becomes a zavag dola, that she needs 7 clean days, and then she also needs a sacrifice on day number 8. Shochatin aleh bashmini. So on her 8th day, you can sacrifice for her because, right, we can assume she'll bring her korban and fine. So now we get to the famous machloka that we've seen a few times already. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav shochatin v'zorkin al tful yom u'mechusar kippurim. Someone who already went to the mikveh in the morning and is just waiting for nightfall, right? He's in the in-between stage. One can slaughter the korban pesach for him, and a mechusar kippurim, and someone who hasn't yet brought his korbanot. Okay, I'll give you a practical example from my life this week because it just couldn't help but notice it. So my son has a tekes siyum course ktsinim, officers course on Wednesday, and I actually realized way back, and I said, if they're going to open it to parents, I better make sure that I get, I had an appointment, and then I realized I did the count, and I said, I'm not going to be ready in time. It's exactly like the Pesach, right? I'm not going to have my tudat mechusenet in time. So I made sure I got my appointment moved earlier. I got my second vaccine this Sunday. So by next Wednesday, when his tekes is, I'll be fine. It wasn't open to parents, but just now they said we're opening up to parents. But only parents who have a tudat chisun. So what did we say in my house, right? I'm a tvul yom, basically, because right now I don't have it. I'm going to get it on Sunday. So if they were to ask today, do you have it in hand and, show us, and otherwise we won't give you a ticket, I wouldn't have it to show. But clearly I'm going to have it because it's just a matter of time passing. So that's exactly this, right? By then I will 100% have it. So thankfully they don't ask in advance and I'll be fine. But I thought this is exactly a good case of a tvul yom in our day. So if you think these things aren't relevant, they are. So now, what does he say? Very important line. You can slaughter and sprinkle the blood for tvul yom and mechusar kippurim, but ein shochatim v'zorkim al tmei sheretz. But if you came in contact with the sheretz and you haven't yet gone to the mikvah, right? You can't. Remember, we saw there was a whole machloket about this. Ve'ula amar, here comes the other opinion. Av shochatim v'zorkim al tmei sheretz. You can even do it for tmei sheretz. So now, the big question is going to be on Rav. It makes no sense what Rav is saying. What's the issue with tvul yom? He'll be fine at night. Tamei sheretz nami chazei leorta. The tmei sheretz also, as long as he goes to the mikvah, and that's the big, as long as, right? But as long as he goes to the mikvah, he'll be ready in time. So what did they say? No, he's mechusar tefillah. It's like saying, theoretically, I could have taken the vaccine, but I didn't. But since theoretically I could have, right? But I didn't. And we all know that, unfortunately, right, there's a big, maybe you will, maybe you won't. A lot of people don't even want to. So the fact that you potentially could have taken it and been ready in time doesn't mean that you have, right? So here's a good example. So they say he's missing going to the mikvah. Who knows if he's going to go to the mikvah? Whereas a tvul yom already went to the mikvah. All he's missing is nightfall, right? Tvul yom nami. So where they say, wait, tvul yom nami, mechusar ha'erev shemesh. She's also missing something. He's missing sunset. But what do they say? Shimsha mimela arva, but obviously there's a big difference because we all know the sun is going to set, as opposed to we don't all know he's going to go to the mikvah. So now they say, well, wait, but Rebbe, you still don't make sense. Mechusar kippurim. You already said, right? It said in the Mishnah, if you're on your 8th day and you haven't yet brought your sacrifice, we can do it for you, but you haven't yet brought your sacrifice. You're missing an action. Maybe you won't do it. Ha-mechusar kapara. So what do they answer? Shekino biyado. He already has his pair of birds in his hand ready to go. So we know he's going to do it. So they're like, what do you mean? Make sure it's nami. Hare mikvah lefanav. In other words, kino biyado is no different than there's a mikvah right in front of him. What's preventing him from doing it? So they say, Dilma Pasha. Say, no, maybe he won't go in the mikvah. So we hachin mechusar kippurim nami dilma pasha. Why don't we say the same thing? Maybe he won't bring the korban. We say, kevan de masrinu lebeitin, and we're going to learn this in Shkalim, since they give it to the Kohanim. The beitin is really the Kohanim. Since they give it to the Kohanim, people will put it in these shofarot. There were these like pushkas, stucco boxes. People would put money in there for the birds, the pair of birds that they needed with like a little note. The Kohanim then would take care of it. And we knew that the Kohanim, we assume every day they make sure to get through all of them. Therefore, if you're on your 8th day, it's no longer in your hands, it's in the Kohan's hands, and we trust the Kohanim. Obviously, we know. Sometimes we trust them, sometimes we don't. In this case, we say we trust them. Ule Rav, okay, so now what does it come out? It comes out that Rav says, Ein shochatim zorkin al tmei sheretz, but really only why? Because we're worried you might not go to the mikvah. But theoretically, on a Torah level, it sounds like you could. It's just Gzeira D'Rabbanan that we're worried that maybe you won't, and therefore we don't. So they're going to question this. You're going to say that really on a Doraita level, you could, and just the rabbi said don't because maybe you won't. Alama, that doesn't match something else Rav said. Alama amarav mitamim echad mehem b'sheretz. Remember when it's 50-50? Rav says, make one of them it's mesheretz. And now, if Doraita, he actually could do the korban, that wouldn't tilt the balance and make it tomahutra b'tzibur, because that, right? And therefore, it can't possibly be that he thinks Doraita you actually could and only D'Rabbanan not. So therefore, they reject the whole reason we just said, and they give a different reason. It's not that we're worried maybe he won't go to the mikvah. And l'rav midoraita nami lochaze. Really, from a Torah level, they can't. Why? Remember those people in the desert who went to Moshe and said, listen, we can't do the Korban Pesach Rishon. What do we do? And then Moshe asked God, and then he says, Pesach Sheni. So it says there, ish ish kiya tameh lanefesh. When it says that whole section, Milo Askinan, was it not a case? Shechal Shvi'i Shalehen Liyop Erev Pesach. Wasn't the case of the people who came to him, and we're going to see where we see this from, they were on their 7th day, meaning they were going to be tahor that night already. Dahainu Tumat Sheretz, and that's equivalent to a Tumat Sheretz. They just didn't finish the process yet. Va'amar Rachman Nitche, and yet the Torah says, we're pushing you off to the next Pesach. So now they say, V'chi Tema, which shows it's all Doraita, and it has nothing to do with we're worried you're not going to do it. It's just Gzeira Katuv. The Torah says, no, you're Tamei now. We can't do a Korban Pesach on someone who's Tamei now. Only if you already went to the mikvah, but these people had. V'chi Tema mimai dahachi. How do you know that that's the case, that it was on their 7th day? To Savar like Rabbi Yitzchak. You must hold like Rabbi Yitzchak. To Amar Tmei Meit Mitzvah hayu. They were Tmei Meit Mitzvah. That's when people go to, they go to deal with someone who nobody else is burying. Shechal Shvi'i Shalehem Liyop Erev Pesach, and their 7th day fell on Erev Pesach. How do we know that? Shnema. What did they say to Moshe? Lo yachlu la'asot haPesach bayom hahu. They couldn't do the Pesach on that day. What do we darshan here? Bayom hahu. Dafka that day, hu de'enan yicholin lasot. Aval machar yicholin lasot. And yet Moshe told him, right? Amar Rachmana nidchu. And God said, push it off to next year, even though they couldn't do it today, but it sounds like they could have done it tomorrow. Okay, back to the Mishnah. Tnan. Zav shar'ash te'riyot shochatin alav b'shvi'i. My lav de lo tavil. Isn't it that he didn't go to the mikvah already? In which case, you would say it's just like a tamei sheretz. Ushmamina shochativ zokinat tamei sheretz. So they say, lo de tavil. Obviously, he did go to the mikvah. So now, I de tavil my kamashmalan. If he went to the mikvah already, what's the chiddush? Why do you even need to tell us? Of course, he could do the korban pesach. They say no, ha kamashmalan, because he's still missing what? Sunset. You might have thought that prevents him. Af agav de mechusar harav shemesh, even though he's just missing sunset. Kamash malan, it's to teach you deshim shemamela arba. There's a bit of a repetition. We all know the sun's going to set, and that's why it's okay. Hachinami mistabra. Also, we can prove this from the continuation that it must be he went to the mikvah. Why? Midikatane seifa. It says in the last part, Ra'ash shalosh riyot shochatin alav bashmini. Not really the last part, but the last part of the zav. If he sees 3 and already he needs a korban, so you can do it on the 8th day. So if the 7th day you'd already gone to the mikvah, then then you need the 8th day to say, not only when you have to wait for Harav Shemesh, which is definitely going to happen, but even when there's a korban, still we assume it's going to happen, and that's because of the Kohanim. You would have thought, and this is what I just said, you might have thought just the 7th day, because he doesn't need to do anything, he just waits for the sunset, he's already gone to the mikvah. You might have thought since he's missing a korban, maybe we wouldn't allow the korban pesach to be brought for him. Kamash malan comes to teach you. You can still, right? You're still allowed. That's the chiddush of the last part. But to lo tavil, right? If it what was the case where he didn't go to the mikvah, then you don't need the 8th day to if you didn't go to the mikvah. Now why? If you didn't go to the mikvah, tamei ma'alya, you're mamash tamei. You didn't even go to the mikvah. So, and yet, shachatim v'zorkina ilave, if that's what the Mishnah was teaching, then ra'ash shalosh b'shmini, detavile b'shvi'i, deklisha tuma. There, you're much less tamei. All you're doing is you're missing a korban, but you're not tamei anymore. So, all the more so, of course, you could do the korban. There would be no point to tell us this in the Mishnah. Lo kol shekain dezarkina, deshachtina v'zorkina ilave. All the more so. Therefore, elalav shmamina must be ra'ash teriyot b'shvi'i. It must be that you actually toveled, and that's why the next case is no. But now they say no. You can explain it otherwise. You could say you still need the 8th day. Why? Now, here's a good, interesting distinction. On the 7th day, to get to the mikveh, how difficult is that? Not so difficult. You could do it yourself. To be adolatakin. You don't really know if your sacrifice is not dependent on you. This is another good example. This comes up all the time in the Gemara. There's difference between something you could do yourself versus something someone else needs to do. It's easier to just do something yourself. If you're relying on other people, who knows, right? We all know at work or something, right? If you're relying on someone else to do something, it doesn't always happen. So, Kamash Malan Kidarav Shmaya. Therefore, the 8th day comes to teach you, no, we do rely on the Kohanim. You might have thought we don't, but you can. The last part, Mazava Shochatim. So, Tane Tana Kameh de Rabada Barava. How can you do a zava on her 7th day? Okay, this is weird. He brought a girsa that it says on the 7th day, ours said the 8th day. How could it be on the 7th day? She has to bring a korban on the 8th day. She can't eat kutchim then. She can't eat the night of Pesach. So he says, even if you're going to say that for a sheretz, you can at least go to the mikveh that day and eat at night. But right? She can't even eat at night because she has to bring a korban the next day. So they say ema bashmini, it must be on the 8th. Now, if you say the 8th, pshita, that's obvious. So they say no. Again, it goes back to what we saw with the zav. Mao detema kevan de mechasra kapara lo. You might have thought since she's missing something, it's not so obvious. She still has to bring a korban. Kamash malan kederav shmaya. Again, we go like Rav Shmaya, who said it's only because, right? It's because we count on the kohanim. Ravina Amar, Nida Tana Kameh. Also, Nida should appear here in the Mishnah. Vahanida Shochatina La Bashvi'i. You can slaughter for her on her 7th day. Now, Nida has a big difference, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Amarle, Nida Bashvi'i Michazia. Right? What are you talking about? When does a Nida go to the mikvah? At the end of the 7 days, not in the morning. She's not like all the other ones. So, how could you say that? Even if you say it's Mesheretz can. It's because at nighttime, as soon as the sun sets, he'll be tahol. But nida laorta deshvi ishali hu detavla ad shmini da avda harev shemesh lo chazia. Right? She has to tovel on the 7th day, the 8th day. So she's not going to just automatically at sunset be ra'oi. So no. Ela ema bashmini. It must be a nida on the 8th day. So now they say nida on the 8th day is nothing. She's finished. Why would there even be an issue? Right? She goes to the mikveh the night of the 8th. Already by the morning, she's totally fine. What would it even be the question? There's no harev shemesh. Pshita. So they say, hashta, right? Uma zava, right? Let's take her compared to a zava. A zava is missing a korban and we let her. Of course, a nida we're going to let. She doesn't even need a sacrifice. Uma zava de mechasra kapara. She has to bring a korban for a zava. And yet, shochatim v'zorkina ala bashmini. Nida de lo mechasra kapara. Tzricha lememar de shachtina v'zorkina ala. You don't need to even say it. So they say no. Nida eat tzricha le. And with this, we'll finish. Sorry for going over today. It was just very complicated beginning of the daf. Hakamash malam b'shmini in b'shvi'i lo. It's to teach you that only in the 8th and not on the 7th. People might confuse zava nida. Okay, so no, nida is only on the 8th, and why is that? Because of the nature of a nida. Kedetanya, as it says, kol chayavei tefilot tfilatam bayom. Everyone who goes to the mikvah goes in the morning. Other than nida v'yoledet tfilatam balayla. Nida and a woman who gives birth, menstruating woman or a woman who gives birth, are unique. They go to the mikveh at night. Why? Tanya, as it says in the following Braita, maybe she could go during the day still. Talmud Lomar Shiv'at Yamim Tiyeh B'nidata. Tehei b'nidata kol shiva. She has to be shivat yamim. You will be a nida. That means don't go to the mikveh till all those days are finished. That's why we go to the mikveh at the end of the 7 days. The yoledet it kash nida, and a woman who gives birth is comparable to a nida because the psukim compare them, and therefore she's in the same category. Okay. Nowadays we do zava. I'm not going to get into all those questions. Really, theoretically, a woman could go to the mikvah on day number 7 in the morning because the extra 7 clean days are zava days. I'm not going to get into all that. They just kind of kept it as, since we're doing it for nida, she only goes at night. Okay, that's a whole other discussion. We'll get to it when we get to Masechet Nida. Okay, with that, we will finish long daf for today. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Tomorrow, just sneak preview, is all about women and Korban Pesach and Adechayev and Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni in both. Very interesting questions. If your Hebrew is good, Tanya Regev wrote an article about women in Korban Pesach. You can look at the site. And I think the Daf Shalahem for next week is also on the topic of women and Pesach Sheni. I think it's going to be on it. I'm not 100% sure, but you'll see next week. So with that, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.